welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of an absolutely delightful book. It was just such a pleasant read, so touching and so funny, and I am so excited for this conversation. Welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yes, thanks, Jen. My name is Amy Weinland Daughters, and I'm the author of You Cannot Mess This Up, a true story that never happened.
It's such a great title, such a great subtitle, really catches your attention. Could you talk a little bit about your career and your journey to this book? Right before we hit record, we were talking a little bit about our respective careers and journeys, and I'd love for you to fill our patrons in.
Right. Yeah, I took a different path to writing. I studied business at Texas Tech University and got a degree, and then moved to Houston and spent about 15 years in the purchasing world, moving my way up. My husband and I both, our careers, we moved up and we got to the point where we were both doing pretty well. And then his company threw a curveball and said, "How about y'all move to the United Kingdom for 3 years?" And we were in our early 30s, mid 30s. We're like, "That's awesome." And we have one little kid. When are we ever going to be able to do that? So we got over there, and I mean, I realized this was going to happen, but I didn't understand the significance of I send my kid to the village school, and then, oh my gosh, now I have 94 hours on my hand. What will I do next? And so I went and took classes at the local University of Birmingham, history classes, because that's always been something I've loved. But that didn't fill it for me. So I started writing seriously then and realized I could have people pay me to write. And I've always written creatively. Even at work, I used to think my emails were about the company picnic were profoundly moving. And I used to think my stuff was funny. And I go back and read my emails on Chardonnay and think they were, life changing. So it was kind of a natural fit. And I realized that this was at the beginning of high-speed internet. I created a little niche for myself to freelance write. And by the time we got back, we had another kid. And by the time it was time for me to go back to work, I had created this little sub career where I made about 75% of my income. So that gave me enough confidence. I actually did sports writing for a long time to write this book, which is an idea I'd had kicking around in my head forever. And I think a lot of people who write or don't write have that, but I just needed the confidence because if you don't fit into that community, I wasn't trained to do that. It took me a while to get there in my own head.
Mm. So let's talk about our main character who shares a name with you. The conceit is absolutely fascinating. You yourself go on this adventure, semi fictional, but like with lots of truth in there. And I'm really curious about your shaping of Amy on the page. How much of you is there, and how much do you depart? What was it like writing yourself in fiction?
Oh, I mean, yeah, it was very cathartic, and I did not expect that. And I like to say that this book is a memoir wrapped up in a tortilla of time travel fiction. So it gave me a lot of leeway, but most of the way I write about myself is true. And it's probably the truest part of the book because obviously the dialogue, I invented a lot of that, but it's my memories as a child, it's myself and the way I perceive myself or the way I perceived myself when I wrote the book. So there's a lot of truth in that. And I didn't expect that to be such it really was impactful. I was one person going into writing that book and I came out another person.
Yeah, it's a really must have been a fascinating process, just so our patrons know, in the premise you are given the opportunity to go back in time to observe yourself for a couple days in 1978, I believe the year is. Um, and gosh, it's just like it sounds like if you could do like like if you were to literalize or make sci-fi like therapy. Like it is exactly therapy. Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. And I've had so many people ask me, so did you work with a therapist or psychoanalyst before you wrote it? So you would, and I was like, no, I wanted to write a funny back in time book. I want to write myself back to my own childhood because I love history, because I love vintage nostalgia because I own a metal detector. I mean, that's what I back in time, I think we can be split into two categories. Some people want to go into the future and the rest of us want to go in the past. And that's I wanted to go back to my own past. And so since I couldn't do that, physically, I did it fictionally.
Yeah, it's when you think about like what doing that sort of work is, it's like literally meeting yourself as a child, which is what you do here. Um, I'm really curious about what that what that process was like for you of revisiting your memories in that way. Um, how did it help you recontextualize them, and how do you feel that it changed you as you hinted before?
Right. And writing the process of writing the book felt like emotionally real time travel because I we were living in Ohio at the time, and I locked myself up in this 70s resort, this Ohio State resort, and I got all the videotapes from that they'd made out of the 8 millimeter film or whatever it was, and and I surrounded myself with the pictures and everything. And so here I am, like a 48-year-old woman, looking at all this and writing what it would look like to watch my parents of the same age, to watch my 10-year-old self, to watch my brother and sister. And immediately, like one of my immediate takeaways was, oh my God, she's crazy. She's got a bowl cut and she's probably needs to be on medication, but they don't have that in 1978. And I was completely horrified by her. And I wrote the part where I see her for the first time and she's dancing all around. I watched film of myself and I was like, oh my gosh, she's nuts. And but the great thing was is I spent 36 hours with her in the narrative of this story. I started to realize like the best parts of us had been lived away. Like here's this kid who had so much confidence in herself, despite the fact that she was just unique, just a unique individual who was not afraid to be herself. And a lot of our child selves are that person. It's very relatable. By the end of the book, I was like, I want to be her when I grow up. I mean, she is admirable. I still think about her all the time, and I almost think about her separate. I can separate her from myself now because I want to make her proud, and that was an absolute life changing experience. And then I realized as I watched her watch the childhood memories that I remembered, I watched her get it wrong, not because she was unintelligent, but because she was naive. And I would have remembered the whole thing differently as a 46-year-old mother of two when I wrote it. And it made me realize memories are malleable. They're based on the perspective of the person who's doing the remembering, even the choices that we just, what we choose to remember. I think it's done very subconsciously, but why we choose certain memories to hold on to.
Mm. Yeah, something that you really grapple with in the book. I've always been really fascinated in like the nature of memory and how, we can build so much of our identities off of things that we totally misremember or that like had a slightly different thing that totally changes the meaning of what that was. So, you talked a little bit about going back to the home videos and historical sources as it were. Was there other research that you did about the time period in order to bring 1978 alive?
Right. And that was my favorite part. Other than the humor, again, I love history. And the research was an absolute delight. And there was so much stuff that didn't make the book because I spent a couple of weeks in the main Houston library. I went through the family archives. I had Sears catalogs. I, went through newspapers and magazines, and I learned so much about the time period. And again, it's such a illustration of how this worked. There was things I found out that happened in 1978. There were things that I was a part of as a 10-year-old person who lived here, but I didn't even know that those things happened because I wouldn't have clued into that as a 10-year-old. As the middle-aged adult researching this book, I was like, wow, I didn't even know I lived as a part of that. And it was fascinating to me. And even, what really fascinating was watching my mom and her role and the opportunities she did not have, even legally. There was a law, and this is in the book. I lived in Texas, in the state, and I live next to Louisiana. There's this head of some kind of law where women couldn't own property, have a checking account. They couldn't do things. And that was absolutely fascinating that had happened in my lifetime.
Mm. Yeah, I think that does lead back to this question about how a child perceives the world. I think the other thing that at least I don't want to speak for other people that I admire about children in general, and perhaps like, child me as well, when I try to go and think back about her a little bit more fondly, is just an ability to live in the moment that like adults don't possess, because we're either being pulled into the future with our worries or about the past and all that. And like a side effect of that is that you don't know what's going on in history around you. You like might hear the word, like I don't know, a missile crisis or what have you, but
Right.
like, you don't know what that means.
Right, because it has no impact on you. You don't worry, and I think that's a very astute statement that you're either being pulled into worrying about the future or being concerned about how the past affect you. The 10-year-old version of myself was just happy to be there,
Yeah.
and she was unafraid to be her unapologetically, unless she got in trouble, to be her real self, and that's why I would like to be more like her every single day of my life.
Yeah. There's like a very interesting thing about moving, further and further into adulthood that I didn't expect is that we spend so much of like our early lives like trying to get away from ourselves as children, and then we spend like the whole second half of it like trying to get back to that first.
Right. No, and the older we get, the more reflective we get, and I think that process, just it's like a down road, like a steamroll. It just, it continues to gain momentum.
I'd love to talk a little bit about your approach to humor, because the book is very, very funny, but it's also there are, serious moments that are touching, and there are difficult emotions in places that are very impactful. How do you balance those two, not tones, I want to say, but maybe modes? Like, how do you make sure that the humor hits and that the dramatic bits do too?
Well, I think, Jen, that was something I didn't realize that I had the capability to do. I think that's the thing I'm probably proudest with. Uh, I recently reread You Cannot Mess This Up, and I liked how it got super serious and then zing, there'd be some funny thing. I was proud of that, but I think that's something I didn't know I had in my wheelhouse of writing. And I think it might be reflective on how I use humor in my own life. And I think it's probably a reflection on that because you know, if things get too serious, that's how real life works. We use humor to get through to the next moment sometimes. And I think that that's a reflection on maybe on how I live life with humor.
I definitely identify with that. Yeah, I feel like, because, and it goes both ways too, a little bit. Like, you can have a really dramatic moment and then the humor will lighten it and like let you move into like a sort of, uh, lighter mood for like what's going to come next. But sometimes also like following the humor with like a hard-hitting dramatic moment, like makes that hit harder too. And I think you master that sort of back and forth very well.
Well, thank you. I mean, that is a huge compliment. Very humbling. Thank you.
Um, you mentioned before, and you mentioned on your website, that you would rather go back in time than to see the future, and that tracks because that's what you do here in this book. But could you talk about that a little bit more? I'm really curious about, what drew you to the past, beyond the sort of like literal, like revisiting your childhood self. And like, I don't know, would you like, I guess, doing in the opposite direction, like looking into the future self, but that wouldn't appeal to you the same way, or?
No, and I think even more so after writing this book because I think I would because one of the things I address in the book is I realized that little Amy doesn't need to know everything I know. Like that would scare her to death. And I think it's the same concept. Like I don't need to know what 80-year-old Amy knows. I
Mm.
don't need to know that because it would just scare me. And then I think like you said it so well, you're getting dragged into the future so you can worry about it. And I feel like with my own emotional state, I wouldn't want to go see the future because I would worry about it then. I wouldn't live. I would be chained to that and somehow, even if I knew what I was going to do wouldn't mess anything up, back to the title, I think I would still be concerned and kind of consumed with knowing too much.
That's true, and that is like an often a sci-fi theme of like, that once you learn the future, that itself has an impact on how you're gonna learn, live your life going forward. Getting out of hypothetical situations and into the book again. I'd love if you could talk a little bit about what it was like portraying your family on the page, and if they also, if there's also like a balance of truth and fiction there, and how you manage like portraying those individuals and relationships.
Yeah, that was more tricky than I thought it was. And I guess emotionally it was trickier, especially as we got closer to the publication date. And the four members of my nuclear family, my mom and dad and my brother and sister, who are the main characters, they knew what I was doing. And my dad basically told me, you don't have to ask us permission. Just do it. Which, and I don't really think he knew what he was getting himself into when he said that. And because I had a hard time balancing, and I think this is a very common, especially for someone who writes memoirs, and this is kind of a memoir in a way, but balancing the truth with the relationships that are still ongoing. And deciding, my brother and sister are easy because we have a delightful relationship. We had fun in childhood together. And so they just thought it was funny. But my mom and dad were trickier. And I was a parent when I wrote the book. So I realized, I was like, oh, if my kids do this, I mean, what's that going to look at? That's scary. I hope they don't tell me if they're going to do that. But specifically with my mom, that was difficult because, like many mother-daughter relationships, we had difficulties. But how much truth of that to let in? And then the other thing that I kept realizing in writing the book was, again, memories are malleable. So I was hard on mom because of the way I remembered things. But was that the whole truth? And what did she remember? And so I think that was difficult. But basically, I didn't give them the book. They knew about it until the book came out in March, and I literally dropped it at their houses in a binder at Christmas, and then left town. And my friends were like, "You got to give it to him. You got to give it to him." And all of them, including my mom, just showed up with such grace and love and just supported me. And I realized that I'm super fortunate that that was my experience, and it's actually led to conversations that we wouldn't have had. My mother and I, that's the epilogue of the book. That conversation actually happened because we never talked about our feelings growing up. My brother and sister and I have had conversations. My dad has passed away right before the book came out suddenly, which is unfortunate. But he sent me a long text. That was the last text I got from him, was the review of the book. And what a gift, So, but it spurred conversations that otherwise we wouldn't have had.
Wow. Yeah, that's really lovely. I was going to ask, like, if it did spur conversations and change the way that you view those relationships, but it sounds like that it had a net positive effect.
Right. And I think, I wonder, if someone was hurt, would they have said it to me? I don't know. That's things, especially after my dad passed, that you're never gonna have answers to. But I do know, I think the good outweighs the bad, because even with my mom, she loved the themes about, that was great that she was married to this great guy and lived in a nice suburban house. But what was that the life she wanted? And as a woman in the 60s and 70s, that was completely, what was expected. And people looked at her and said, "Oh my God, you got to be the happiest girl on the street," whether she was or not. And she loved my dad, and I think they loved being married, but she loved those themes being investigated for her. She found that very refreshing. And we've had much more open conversations about her marriage, about her place. She wanted to write and she never could because she didn't have the opportunity to move to England and take a right turn ever.
Well, that's so interesting. Yeah, it sounds like it validates like the sort of old truth that like we meet our parents once as children and then again as, grown-ups. We have to get to know them all over again. And that really does open a door to deeper conversations that were ever possible.
Right.
So before we go, could you just tell us a little bit about your second book, Dear Dana?
Right. Dear Dana, I'll try to elevator pitch it, but that's so I had the idea for You Could Not Mess This Up, and Dear Dana just happened to me. It's just a story that steamrolled, and just to try to put it in a short little window here, I was on Facebook and thought of a friend I'd met at a summer camp 30 years ago. We probably spent 6 weeks together, and we were both very loud and thought we were funny. But I look, there she is. I friend her. It means nothing. She accepts my friendship request. I realize she has a bunch of kids, four daughters, one son. The son has cancer, and he's at St. Jude in Memphis, so he's fighting for his life. Right away, as a mom, as a human being, I became invested in the story. But then sometime, and I didn't hit like, or I didn't comment on any of her posts because I felt like that was disingenuous because I didn't know her and I didn't know the kid. But he went into remission, he relapsed, and I sat down to write that Monday morning. It was like a lightning bolt hit me. I was like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna start writing Dana and Parker letters and send them to the Ronald McDonald House. And I hadn't written anyone a letter in 30 years. I wasn't the letter writing lady. I hadn't spoken to this woman or had any contact with her in 30 years, never met the kid. But I just started writing these weekly letters, like, supportive letters. They start getting longer. But after about 12 weeks, like, devastation happens and Parker passes away at age 15. And then I thought it had nothing to do with me. I thought, well, what should I do? And I was like mini lightning bolt, like 2 weeks later, I was like, I'll just keep writing her. Only now I sent the letters to her husband's law office address. I mean, it's different levels of crazy here. And so after about 4 months of that, with me thinking every week, like, what are you doing? She lost her son and you're sending her letters. She doesn't even know you. She started writing me back. And we had 2 years where this is like 2017, we just wrote each other. And it created this incredible free space where I didn't know when she was reading my stuff. She didn't know when, I was reading her stuff. So there was this free space between us where we could say anything we wanted to. We couldn't look across and see what the other reaction was. The timing thing, there was this gap between us. We didn't know what we believed politically. Like, I didn't know what religion she practiced, where she stood on any issue. And I didn't care, because all I cared is she lost her kid and we opened up each other. I looked at my life from the outside in. It was super cathartic. She opened up about her grief because I was a safe space for that. And we used to tell each other, oh, I've never told anybody this, but I know I can trust you. It was crazy, but it had such a profound impact on me. I thought, how can this one girl from this list of random people change the way I look at almost everything? And I was like, and what else out there on this random list? What else untapped goodness is there? And so I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go bananagrams and I'm going to write every one of these people a letter. So that's what I did. It took me 18 months and I wrote 600 handwritten letters. Now I speak about it and I talk about how if you connect with somebody, that regardless of who believes what, with nothing but goodwill on the line, and they respond in kind, that suddenly all those things that separate us, they can't dictate who we can and can't care about.
Gosh,
So the book chronicles both those stories and weaves them together.
yeah, absolutely fascinating story, and I really look forward to reading that one as well. I'm going to go pick that one up after after this. So
yeah, it's a great story, but I think the universe just gave me a great story, and now I speak about handwritten letters and notes and the impact that we all have this little tool in our human toolkits. And you don't have to be a writer, and you don't have to be, all you have to do is have a human heart, some sincerity, and a postage stamp, and you can literally just blow somebody away with just very simply.
Absolutely. Because there's not a lot of, positive mail and there's
Right.
a lot of positive stories about social media anymore. So that's really refreshing.
Yeah. And thank you for letting me share that too. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you for stopping by the show and for talking about your work. It's been absolutely lovely.
Yeah, it's been delightful. Thank you, Jen.
Problem. Listeners, please check out You Cannot Mess This Up, A True Story That Never Happened. And while you're at it, check out Dear Dana too. They're both available as of when you hear this. So head to your favorite bookstore or website or library, wherever you like to go for your books. And we will catch you next time. It's time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.